Welcome back to the Producer Podcast. We're East Coast bound today as I'm joined by Matthew Storm and Dan Rogers from the South Carolina Film Commission to talk everything you should know about filming in beautiful South Carolina. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Matt and Dan, for taking the time to come on to the Producer Podcast today.
Yeah,
Hey, thanks
absolutely.
for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess to start, I would just love to hear a little bit about yourself, how you came to work at the South Carolina Film Commission, and what your roles there are.
Okay. So Dan Rogers, I was an intern here with the Film Commission way back in the day, 1987, when I was still in college, and turned that internship into a full-time job in 1988, and I've been here ever since. So I studied media arts at the University of South Carolina with a concentration in film, and I had made a 16 millimeter film that got a little bit of recognition, like at the Chicago International Film Festival. And when the film
Nice.
office, yeah, when the film office called, the department said, "Hey, do you have anybody that you would, we need an intern. Do you need, have anybody in mind?" The dean remembered me, and I guess, and he called me, he brought me in and said, "Dan, you want to intern at the film office?" I said, "What's a film office? I'm a film student, I don't know what film offices were." But I like helping student filmmakers, by the way. It's a
Okay.
sidebar here because I've been there. I know what it's like. Matt can tell you he was a film student as well, and it takes a lot. Obviously, when you're first kind of trying to put your arms around, what it takes to make anything, even a short,
Hmm.
any kind of content today requires so much coordination and foresight and understanding of how things operate in the real world, even though you have your vision. So we both come to the table, realizing that on both the big studio productions and even the smaller student productions. So when students, hit us up and use our location library, say, "Hey, I like this location," and I try to walk them through and help them get the best, understand the dynamics that they're probably facing. And yeah, I hope it helps, coming from that background myself.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Did you initially think you were going to stay with the film office this long, or was
Well,
it
no, that's a good question. I grew up as a military brat, so I was always
okay?
moving as a kid, and I was tired of moving by the time my dad retired in South Carolina. So at that point, I was in high school and, thinking about these things. So I think when I came to University of South Carolina, the media arts department, I was pretty much thinking, yeah, I could go to Hollywood. My idol at the time was Spielberg, and he had
Okay.
just brought in this series called Amazing Stories on NBC, and they were bringing in new filmmakers like Phil Joannou, who at the time had won an Academy Award for Best Student Film. And I was thinking, oh, that could be me. I could write a short or direct a short like that because again, that was my worldview of being able to do little chunks at a time. And but then when this came open, I was like, well, gosh, I get to work on lots of different projects, features, TV shows, TV commercials, print ads, catalogs, music videos. I mean, I've been involved in all that type. And I thought, this isn't so bad. I get to live, in a nice
Hmm.
state. I don't have to move anymore. I don't have to take on the gypsy lifestyle of a filmmaker that they sometimes have to do. And I can still be in the film world. So there was a kind of a little bit of a reconciliation there with my original dreams and just saying, you know what, I'm good. This is fun. So 35 years later, I can actually 36 in 2 weeks. I can
Okay.
say, yeah, it's been a good ride.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
36 years.
Yeah. Shush.
Man.
Shush. Yes, I can say that I was on the set of Forrest Gump when Bubba died on the banks of the Vietnam.
Nice.
And that film, its 30-year release is this summer. It's been
Okay.
30 years since Forrest Gump entered the theaters, 1993 or 94. I mean, it was shot in 93. Came out in the theaters in July of 94. Crazy, crazy to think.
Yeah. How about you, Matt? How did you get started
Um,
here?
Well, I didn't realize it was 36 years, Dan. Good grief. So I was 10 when Dan started. That's crazy. So I'm Matt. I'm the film commissioner, film office manager, whatever. I handle more the incentive side of things. We kind of work through legislation to try to incentivize and bring big projects in. Dan handles a lot of the locations and smaller independent things that are like photo shoots and catalog shoots and stuff like that. Dan helps them out a lot. I'm more concerned about like bringing in the big guys. Also, I do a lot with the production. We call it a production fund, where we try to teach the local South Carolinians about film and instruct communities about the importance of having film, the financial benefits, and also we host a lot of workshops through Trident Tech and University of South Carolina to teach kids and students about different aspects of filmmaking. So I got here through kind of I don't know, I guess the same traditional way. I went to North Carolina School of the Arts and graduated in 2006, and then moved out to LA. And I was a PA on an HBO show that I weaseled my way into the locations department on. And from there on, I was a location manager. So I did that for 13 years. I did a bunch of TV shows. I did a couple features. I was in LA. I was in Charlotte. I was in Wilmington, and then finally moved to Atlanta. And I was working on a TV series there. We were just wrapping out the second season of a Fox show. And I had worked with Dan on a couple projects here in South Carolina, Outcast, which is actually right behind me, shot in the Rock Hill area, which is kind of the northern part of the state. Mm-hmm. And we did a show called, it was a pilot for ABC, I think. We shot that out in Myrtle Beach, and they were trying to help me out with some location issues. So I got to know Dan pretty well. And then when this position opened up, he said, I don't know where you are in your career, but you might want to check this out. And I was like, yeah, I got 3 kids at this point and tired of moving around. Like you mentioned, that gypsy lifestyle that is so prevalent in the film community. I was just, and the breakneck speed of production, it was a lot. I didn't even realize how much it was until I stopped doing it and started working for the state, which is definitely not a breakneck pace.
I bet not.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. So I've been here for I'll be 5 years at the end of April, I guess.
Okay.
So yeah, but they'll have to pry me out of the seat. They'll have to figure out a way to not let me come back before I'll leave this place. It's great. It's a good state. We have a good program. I love working with Dan. We have good scouts. The people here are awesome. So it's a good place.
And we love what Matt brings to the table with his production background, because traditionally this state has always been location driven.
Okay.
Films that shot here: The Notebook, Sleeping with the Enemy, The Program, The Patriot. All those films were literally brought because of our locations. So it's the state is beautiful. It has a lot of diversity. We've got mountains, we got small towns, we got a little bit of urban, not much. We got swamps, we got jungle. Obviously, Forrest Gump. The only reason we got Forrest Gump is because we have jungles. So that kind of legacy filmmaking, if you want to call it that, of bringing in films based on our location, requires a film office that needs to, not just it has to understand the dynamics of what a production brings, what it means to bring a production of any size like that, especially the big boys like that, to kind of descend on a community. I call it, it's a combination of the army and the circus coming to town. It's very organized, but it's organized chaos. It looks like everything's just crazy on set, yet everything has their place. And our job as a film office is to try to bridge that gap to allow production to do what they need to do, hopefully within the scope of using a living, breathing community. It's not a back lot. It's not a stage. It's a community that has to go about their day as well. And so Matt, coming from the location end, absolutely understands how that works. So it's great to have a piece, and I'm always kind of leaning, hey Matt, what about this contract, or what about this? Does this look good? So yeah, it's great to have that backup when you need it.
I bet. I'd love to hear because you kind of were talking there, Dan, about some of the different terrain in that South Carolina offers. So I'd love to hear a more like what are unique characteristics or aspects of your state that maybe people don't know about that they might find interesting for using in film.
Well, we've been shot for heaven and for the depths of the ocean. There was a Made in Heaven back in the early 80s that that had Kelly McGillis and Timothy Hutton in, and they play two souls that fell in love in heaven, but don't know they have met each other, and they shot Charleston for heaven because it was just so
it's based on a true story too.
Seriously? I didn't know that. No.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So Made in Heaven, I think it came out in 87. Look it up. And then the depths of the ocean, we shot, The Abyss, which of all films, most people don't kind of tie in a high-tech film like The Abyss with South Carolina. But at the time, when we were James Cameron and his guys were looking around, they were needing a tank big enough where they built their set in it. And our office was out in LA at a trade show called AFCI, Location Expo, put on by the Association of Film Commissioners International. And that was back in the day before internet, before, all you could just get on the computer and look for stuff. All the film commissions would come to LA and they would set up a table, a booth, whatever it was. And producers, filmmakers, location managers, everybody would come to either Santa Monica or wherever we happened to be housed. And literally you'd have the world in on one floor, and you would just go look around for what you needed by talking to all the film commissioners and say, hey, we need this, what do you got? So again, back in the day when everything was location driven, James Cameron's people came up to our booth and said, we need we're looking for a tank. We said, well, we don't have purpose-built tanks, but we do have an unused nuclear facility. Don't get me wrong here. It was never active. Duke Energy, which is a huge, company here in South Carolina, North Carolina, had built this nuclear at what was in the 70s when nuclear energy was really kind of being pushed. They built this huge facility in Gaffney, South Carolina, but it never went online. It never even completed because right about mid to late 70s, nuclear energy kind of fell out of favor. And so they abandoned that project. And because they abandoned it, it was just sitting there. And a local filmmaker, local meaning in the Carolinas, a local filmmaker by the name of Earl Owensby, saw an opportunity. He said, hey, I've been making films in Shelby, North Carolina for years. I can build this, create a studio out of it, and bring in more than just what I shoot on my own, because he was, independent.
Right.
So he bought the facility, told us about it. And because we knew about it, we told Cameron's people that, and they said, sounds pretty good, because the main tank where they were going to hold the nuclear rods was just a tank. There was nothing in it. Like I said, it was 200 feet across and 50 feet deep. So they're like, that's pretty amazing. So they checked it out and they decided, yeah, we can make this happen. So it was months of building and getting it prepared to hold water. And I understand, you can probably go online, or it used to be online. It was called The Making of the Abyss. And to this day, I've heard that it's still the most technically difficult film ever made, because everything was shot underwater, literally underwater. Whereas now Avatar and all the stuff he's been doing, it's all CGI. But in those days, he wanted the actors in their wetsuits. He wanted them underwater. He was filming underwater. It was just a crazy, almost year-long process of getting it shot. And it was very difficult. You'd be lucky to get a page a day, if that, half a page a day. I don't know what the count was, but it was a very,
grueling process for everybody involved. But the film today still holds up, I think.
Hmm.
He just had a release last year, I think, with his cut, his version. I didn't
Okay.
see it, but I understood that he was able to tweak a few things and get it the way he wanted it. Even though he had the original release, he had to cut down the ending, but then they re-released it with Cameron's cut. It still didn't measure up to what he wanted, so he released it again last year in certain theaters for that purpose. But anyway, so getting back to that location driven question that you originally asked. I mean, so there was always something specific that would land a film. So there was a film called The Program. It was a football film, Touchstone Pictures, James Caan, Craig Sheffer, um, Halle Berry. It started the world of college football. Well, again, Disney/Touchstone was looking around for college football stadiums that had almost a 360 perspective, so you wouldn't have
Okay.
empty end zones. And our University of South Carolina Williams-Brice Stadium offered that. So again, that's what brought that film to Columbia, here where we are in the capital city. I could think of, like I said, I mentioned earlier before, Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts. The whole storyline is she's an abused wife, runs away from her husband. She's living in this gorgeous, very expensive beach house on the coast, and then she decides to hide out in Iowa, of all places. uh, Cedar
Right.
Falls, Iowa. I don't know if there is a Cedar Falls, Iowa,
Yep.
but
That's just
okay.
down the road from me. So,
Oh wow. Okay. All right. Well, we became Cedar Falls, Iowa, the little town of Abbeville, South Carolina, because
okay.
we had brick streets and had a square, a literal
Hmm.
square all the way around it. So it made it beautiful to shoot 360 degrees. And that's where Julia Roberts runs away from. So she went from literally Wilmington, North Carolina, where the beach scenes were shot, to Abbeville, South Carolina, where the rest of the movie was shot. So those were the days when, again, studios were, trying to just put everything up on the screen, get your
Right.
production values as much as possible within reason. Obviously, again, going from a 4 hour drive, I guess 4 or 5 hour drive from Wilmington to Abbeville was not a deal killer, so they made it work. Whereas going all the way to Iowa would have certainly made
Yeah.
a more expensive of a commute. And again, Forrest Gump, same thing. Paramount Pictures had all their southern looks in Louisiana at the time. They had the Greenbow, Alabama, the town of Greenbow, Alabama. They had a couple things picked out, but they didn't have jungle. And 15 minutes of that film is Vietnam, at least
Hmm.
15 to 20 minutes. So they weren't going to go to Puerto Rico. They weren't going to go to Hawaii. That's just such a big expense. So then when we sent them pictures of Hunting Island State Park, South Carolina is known as the Palmetto State. The palmetto tree is a cousin to the palm tree, so it looks very, very similar. And when they saw this state park that was self-contained, had a lagoon, had all these palmetto trees all over it, they're like, wow, this is cool. And they asked the question every film commission loves to hear: this is great. What else you got? So at that point,
Nice.
we built, the world of Forrest Gump based on Beaufort, South Carolina being the epicenter, because Hunting Island is right outside of the town of Beaufort. So again, all those films, The Notebook, it was written by Nicholas Sparks, who wrote it for North Carolina, but again, we just had better looking locations for romantic film, including the famous scene where Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling are rowing in that boat. That was a
Hmm.
contained area called Cypress Gardens. It had
Okay.
this, they brought in the birds, they trained those birds so that they wouldn't swim away. And they did that scene in the boat with the beautiful cypress trees. And again, that just brought out so much more production value, gave so much more production value. And a little behind the scenes story on that scene, when the director, John Cassavetes Jr., was looking to, make this film, he sent the script to a bunch of animal wranglers in LA. And all the animal wranglers, when they read that scene where the birds are supposed to kind of glide along the boat with the two
Hmm.
young lovers, they're like, ain't gonna happen. Birds don't just navigate towards people like that. They usually shy away. Do it CGI. This was early days of CGI. And Cassavetes said, that's going to ruin the whole scene. It's a very real scene. I want it to be grounded in
Right.
reality. So he just kind of put it aside and came to South Carolina, started putting their crew together. And one of the crew guys was a guy named Dan Heydrich. and he was an animal wrangler. He started out, he started out as the first carriage business in Charleston, South Carolina. It's very historic, and they do like these carriage rides. You get on a horse, not on a horse literally, but a horse will pull you on a carriage through the streets of Charleston to kind of soak in the charm. He started that in the mid '70s, late '70s. So he was always working with animals. And when he was talking, the director goes, "Man, give me 6 months. I can train these birds for you." And he literally did. He got on a boat, put on a blue dress, got these new hatched ducklings that kind of followed mama duck, into the boat. And for like I said, months, he just had them do that. And so when Rachel McAdams and Brian Gosling got in their boat, the blue dress was there. Those birds were mature at that point, and they followed it. And
Interesting.
Everybody loved that shot. In fact, when I wasn't on the set that day, but I heard after they got their shot, everybody turned to Dan Heydrich and gave him the applause for making it happen. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, so you mentioned your beaches in there, and that's something I've yet in any of my films to encounter, is filming stuff on beaches. What would be some things that you would recommend that producers keep in mind when looking around to do beach scenes?
Turtles. No, they're very cute, right? And they're protected, but they're protected, and it's all up and down the eastern coast.
Okay.
So that's a big issue, because a lot of these Outer Banks wanted to shoot a night scene. It was a little fight scene that they had on a beach with a bonfire. It was supposed to, I mean, in your mind, it makes sense. Why would this be a big deal? It's a big deal because of the light and because of the sensitive nature of beach, of turtle nesting.
Mm-hmm.
Turtles come up, and they do it every year. It's the same family that the mom will come up and dig a hole and drop like 100 eggs, and then waddle her way back into the ocean. And then those 100 eggs eventually will come popping out and go into the ocean. But if you disturb them, they could all die. And since they're a protected species, they also like to do this thing where they come out, and the first glimpse of light is what they head towards. So if you go out to the beach during the summertime, during the turtle matings or during the turtle birthing season, you have to have all your lights out, even if you're on, you pay whatever for an Airbnb or whatever on the ocean. All your lights have to be turned out that are facing the beach, because that is the direction that the sea turtles will navigate towards. And of course, then they'll die. Producers didn't realize that, I guess, and it was a big to do. So finding the right place and the right temperament for shooting during the summer a beach scene at night, that was a bit more of an undertaking than I would have thought about. Even coming from a location world, that wouldn't have even crossed my mind. So yeah, that was a learning curve. What else you got, Dan?
Well, and this is not to put down our beaches, we've got 60 miles in Myrtle Beach alone, and we've had plenty of shoots, but a lot of people do ask, well, we want the sparkling blue waters. Well, that's not the East Coast until you get way down into Florida. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not much of the Atlantic. It only happens that way because of the jet stream that happens to clear the sediment once you get down in the Florida beaches, and that's even further south in Florida. You go to Jacksonville and it looks just like ours. So yeah, that's usually a perception that we have to correct a little bit. And the waves aren't as big as they are on the West Coast, where some producers think, okay, I've got, like in The Notebook, in Dear John, when Channing Tatum's character is surfing, they got him surfing, and they got a couple shots of it, but it's not major wave surfing, unless a hurricane is on its way, and then all the surfers come out like 2 days before the hurricane hits, because everything is really moving at that point. But it's just a different type of vibe on our coast compared to at least the West Coast understanding of how it works. But I will say, in our since we always talk about locations and bragging rights, we do have more beaches than North Carolina and Georgia. So let's just put that to rest. Accessible beaches, and even that.
Okay.
North Carolina has a bunch of beaches as well, but most of them are on the Outer Banks, and you have to really, take a ferry or drive way out there to get to them. Georgia only has a little
section that's inhabitable that you can drive up to right outside
Mhm.
of Savannah called Tybee Island. After that, it takes for a production perspective, it would just be too hard to try to find, access to their other beaches.
And I think it's because it's protected wetland, like a state protected wetland.
Okay.
So, anyway, I realize you don't have any beaches in Iowa, but
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't.
No.
I did want to touch on incentives and tax credits and things like that.
the fun stuff.
Yeah.
The real mind bending stuff.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to start, just like what does South Carolina have to offer in that realm of things?
Yeah, so we are, by legislation, we are given X amount of money per year. So we're given as it stands today, there's some legislation on the table that may change this in the next fiscal year, which starts in July.
Okay.
But as it stands today, we get $10 million by legislation, and then we get an additional 26% of the admissions tax. So when you go to a movie or you go to a concert or a play or Carowinds, which is a theme park, part of the taxes that you're paying is an admissions tax to that event or to that place, and we get 26% of that. And it normally comes out to around $5.5–6 million that we get.
Nice.
And so it's something like, we are pretty conservative with it. The past couple of years, there's been a lot more that we've gotten, but figure $16 million that we get every year. And of that 16, we're kind of the stewards of it. Dan and I are the stewards of it. So we got to figure out, when a project comes to us and says, hey, we want to shoot there, do you guys have any money? We have to figure out how much we have, because we're only given X amount. And then how much of that is already taken, and how much of that can we reasonably expect to give to this project? And if the project, there have been years where we've been out of money because of that, because we just weren't, it just didn't, it wasn't able to happen. We've had big projects come in, and it's, we're just going to be out of money this year because HBO's got this massive TV show that wants to shoot here. Which is a good problem to have, I realize.
Right.
But it does, it kicks a lot of other productions out. So we're a cash rebate state.
Okay.
So production comes in, they work with me and with a member of the Department of Revenue, and she does audit pulls all throughout the production, so that at the end of the production, we do one big cumulative audit, and we cut a check, theoretically, if all things are perfect, within 30 days of the production being finished, which is super handy for things like post-production or paying back your investors or, that kind of thing. We also offer, we offer two different types of rebates. So for the wage, if you're using in-state people, we have about a crew and a half, hopefully pushing 2 crews at this point, size of throughout the state, of very talented crews. Actually, it's a really good, it's a good state to work in as far as talent goes. And if you're bringing somebody in, or I'm sorry, if you're employing somebody from the state, you're going to get rebated at 25% on their wages. That doesn't count fringe or anything like that, but their wages straight up 25%. That would be any of their kit rentals or per diems, anything like that is included as a wage as well. But since most of your department heads are probably going to come in from out of state, most of your creative folks are going to come in from out of state, those are rebated at 20%.
Okay.
So still something for
yes.
everyone. That could be our new slogan, Dan, something for everyone. Same goes for spin. So if you're renting a location, or if you're buying a computer, or if you're anything that you're buying in state through a certified South Carolina vendor, is going to be rebated at 30%. And anything that you bring in from out of state, certain equipment and stuff that we just don't have here in the state, is going to be rebated at 25%. So again, something for everyone. We do rebate on most things, and it's cash back at the end of the show. So we try to keep it simple. it's only two of us here in the office, and we work with DOR to run the audit. So we can kind of, we're very easy to work with. I've heard it said that Dan's wife will cook you nice cakes, as if you come here. I haven't seen that yet, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of what we have to offer. It's sitting on a lot of money right now. So there's some producers listening that are looking for a place to put a film with good crews and beautiful locations.
Yeah. I mean, we consider ourselves a boutique place. Unlike our neighbor to the west, Georgia. I mean, Georgia's open to all comers. So, it's almost an entitlement. If you spend more than $500,000, you are entitled to the Georgia tax credit. You're going to get it. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they give away a bunch of money. I mean, now it's not cash, it's a tax credit. But I understand, like in the last couple of years, it's been on an average about $1 billion a year that they're giving away in tax credits. Yeah. Just to kind of compare our little 15 million to $1 billion. I mean, it's just not, we're not going to get the Marvel universe, the MCU and all, it just because, again, like Matt said, we found our best bang for the buck in the TV world. So Outer Banks and The Righteous Gemstones, they're both going on their 4th season right now, and they hire hundreds of people, sometimes thousands when you include all the extras, especially for Righteous Gemstones. Yeah, because all their church, their mega church has literally thousands of people in it. But they're here for 7 months, and they're hiring our crew for 7 months. So it's a great thing to have. Now, we love features as well. Features are kind of one and done. They come in, they shoot 25, 30 days, and they're done. In fact, we had a feature shoot 2 years ago that's about to be released in the theaters and on Hulu called Suncoast. Today. Oh, it's today. Okay, there we go.
Today. Yes, on Hulu.
Yeah, Woody Harrelson and Laura Linney. And that was it took place in Florida. But a combination of our incentives and our locations, because we could match Florida, made them come here. So that's the game now, is trying to find that project that not too big, not real small, because that can has its own unique dynamic at play, but just the right, has some good name actors, has the possibility of kind of breaking out, showing off our locations. But the seal, usually the seal to the deal is the incentives as well. So it's that package deal now. Instead of just locations, it's locations, crew, and incentives.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So then, with your rebate, is that something that people can just apply whenever for, or are there certain windows throughout the year that they can apply?
They would contact us. So we got to make sure your budget has to be over $1 million of in-state spend. So if you're spending over $1 million in South Carolina, that includes wages. If you're planning on employing a bunch of people too, that's great. That's what gets you in the door. That's our threshold, is $1 million. And they would contact us to kind of send us over their budget. We can take a look at it to make sure that it all looks right. And then I send them an application link. It's pretty quick, pretty simple. I run it up the flagpole through our department, make sure that everybody's in agreement. We're under Parks, Rec, and Tourism. We're kind of under that arm, or the umbrella of state government. And we are I mean, there's a couple different factions that people look at it from, but by and large, if we like the project and we think that it's important for South Carolina, our boss Dwayne Parrish, he heads up the department, and he's all for film and sees the benefit in the financial benefit in having film. So so we're usually in a pretty good place to approve things. And then from there, it's you have 60 days from time of approval to begin your pre-production activities, whether it's scouting, whether it's getting your office going, whatever. But as long as you're 60 days out, you can go ahead and jump in. I know that there's some states that you go in. I just heard this the other day. And maybe Ohio, where these people are setting up, I don't know if it's shell companies or not, but it's like you have to go in and you block this time out. You block this money out. We're a first come, first serve basis. So, you come in, you do your thing 60 days after that, and then it's off to the races. That's how it works.
Nice. With this, are there, because some of the other film offices I've talked to, sometimes there's nuances between whether the production's like an in-state production or if it's one that's coming in from out of state in terms of additional benefits or incentives or things like that. Is there anything like that with yours?
Well, for in-state, you get the extra 5%. You have to be a brick and mortar store. You have to have a sign. You have to have an employee. But if you have a brick and mortar operation in the state, then you would be qualified to getting a 30% rebate. If you're running, and we've had it, to that point, we've had some companies come in and they say, well, we're an in-state company. I live in South Carolina. But maybe it's somebody's garage that there's equipment being stored in and it's being taken out of. It's not a real brick and mortar company. So that is part of our deal, is we've got to check that out and make sure that they're all qualified South Carolina expenses, because we want to, while we would love to be able to supply everyone the full rebate, it's not really fair to actual brick and mortar companies that are here in the state, that pay state taxes, that stay in whether there's production or not. So we try to reward people for actually using those bona fide companies.
Right.
And if you're a filmmaker, in-state filmmaker, and you've got $1 million that you can show is going to be spent, yeah, you can qualify. And then the state actually offers you an extra tax. Now here we do get into tax credits in South Carolina as investors. So if you're investing in a motion picture and you're a South Carolinian, then you can get a 20% tax credit back on your investment. So that's, again, what Matt was talking about was more on if you're a company that supplies equipment or services to the motion pictures or any production that comes in, we would rather obviously have them pull locally, not only our crew, but our supply base, use them locally. If you're a local filmmaker, we haven't had any local filmmakers yet come up with $1 million that, are totally financed, ready to go and hit that $1 million mark. But we would definitely work with them if they did.
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm definitely, I've not hit that $1 million myself yet to do stuff in Iowa. So I guess since we're kind of talking there, differences between in-state and out-of-state filmmakers, do you have any things that you would like, not necessarily warn out-of-state filmmakers, but like, hey, heads up, if you're not from South Carolina and you're coming here, these are things to just be aware of about our state?
I will say, and Dan, you can jump in, but I would say that it's really the number of crew. If you're going to have a big enough project to warrant the incentive package, you're going to be looking at a minimum of around 50 crew. Obviously that can get more as more stuff is involved, but on a smaller budget, $2-3 million feature, you're looking at somewhere around 50 to 75 crew. And you have to figure the best numbers that I've seen of in-state crew that has been that companies have been able to retain on the for the production is around 45 to 50%. On a good day, 50%. Okay. Everybody else is coming in from out of state. So when you're making your preliminary budgets, don't budget so high you're thinking you're going to get everybody from South Carolina, so you're not adding in all the additional per diems, and you're not when you're thinking of a rebate number, it may be a little higher than what it's really going to be, because the out of state hires were a whole lot more than what you had originally planned for. Just be wise about that. That actually came to light. You heard us talking about Suncoast, which dropped on Hulu today. That was one of the things that the producer was saying, was he was surprised. He would have gone back and redone the budget if he would have known, if it would have, like, now he's lived it, so he knows exactly how many folks he was going to have to bring in from Florida and from out of the state. Unfortunately, it's a problem that we're working on, and it's a problem that we here in the office are trying to figure out how to solve, doing different things. Like I mentioned, that production fund where we're teaching folks how to, this is what an electrician does, this is what a grip does. We just have one for costumes, we just have one for hair and makeup. So, teaching different departmental tasks trying to grow that crew base so you won't have to bring folks in from Florida. Right now, though, you're going to have to bring in, figure a little over half of your crew is probably going to come in from out of state.
And it's a timing issue too. I mean, like right now, Outer Banks is not literally shooting in South Carolina. They're in Morocco, but they are coming back. And then Gemstones picks up almost the same time, right after they finish. So those two big shows do take up the bulk of our crew. So if you got your own little $2 million, $3 million feature that wants to try to be shooting at the same time, it just becomes a challenge to try to find any available crew that are, qualified too. The people that you want, everybody wants the best person, obviously, to be on their film. You can find nothing against wedding videographers. I did it as a side gig for a while, but you don't want to hire a wedding videographer to shoot a feature film. So, but our database that has, we keep a database active of all the crew listing, the people that work in this industry. And it's a mix. It's a mix of people with very, very good quality, high-end experience, and others that are just starting out. And so some of the smaller projects might hire those people that are just starting out because they're willing to give them a chance, whereas the big boys might not, because they've got their standards, they've got the money, they've got the resources to try to, fill in the gap wherever they can pick and choose who they want. And then if the smaller ones can maybe even take a second or a third position, a person who has had some experience, maybe not as much, and bump them up to a higher level and within the crew. And that happens a lot too. So it's really, it's a timing issue. And we try to be forthright when producers call us to tell them, here's what the lay of the land is right now. If you're talking about coming in at this, time frame, here's what you're going to be faced with. So we try to eliminate as many surprises as possible.
All right. That's all. Yeah, good to know. I'm going to start wrapping things up here. Got kind of a few kind of closing wrap-up questions for you both. And the first one is there anything that, whether you're talking to in-state filmmakers or maybe out-of-state filmmakers, but this is like something not a lot of people know about South Carolina that you wish more filmmakers knew?
Food's great. That's pretty lame.
It's very hot during the summer.
Yeah, it's very.
And the locals know that, but people from out of state sometimes don't understand how hot it can get in the August.
But here is something to that effect: is that we've had productions that have looked for if they have water work to do, but they're based in New York or it's a new northern story. There are times when they would rather come down because they need to shoot practically in the water. Dan, you can speak to this. There was a TV show called The Sinner that shot there. It was based in New York. They were shooting in October and they needed to shoot Jessica Biel in the water. So they found a park here in South Carolina that they could actually shoot.
And that was late October when they shot it.
Okay.
So it still looked like a summer scene in upstate New York. It had a little bit of hills in the background. I mean, they moved the company out of Charleston to like a 2.5-hour drive to the state park called Chirral State Park. And because it had everything they wanted and you could get in the water and it was fine. So yeah. I mean, we've had, as I said, as hot as it is in August, that heat helps us by the time you get to October, November, because it's very doable to shoot. And even The Notebook, the famous scene where they're, on the dock with the pouring rain, that was shot in February.
Okay.
For crying out loud, you got your actors wet in February and you can do it in South Carolina. I mean, I'm not saying they weren't cold. They probably were cold, but not half as cold as you'd be somewhere else.
Yes.
Trying to make that scene happen.
Yeah, no, I would not want to be doing that in Iowa right now. My actors would probably be walking off the set.
Right.
What would be a piece of advice you would give to a filmmaker that it's their first time working with the film office?
You need to make sure that you have a good accounting department. And that's a department that is very overlooked. Truth be told, we have one certified production accountant in South Carolina or from South Carolina. It's a field that we're trying to grow because it's such a necessary component because we're doing audits with them. We're in constant communication with them, and they're more for us we like to say that we're executive producing these movies.
Okay.
Because we are funding them back a good portion of money in order to have them come here. So we need to have a good working relationship with that production accountant. If that production accountant doesn't understand what we're asking for and doesn't know how to ask for help for things, it becomes a very problematic thing. It just stymies the end rebate. If there are not, if we have very basic, simple things that we have to get before production comes into town. And if that accountant is not able to get that for us, it makes the back end so much harder, because as you well know, once you get to a certain point in filmmaking, you don't care. Like, nobody's listening to the EPs at that point, right? You're focused on production. You have to worry about making your day. You have to worry about tomorrow. And then you've got a call sheet that you got to put out, and you got to worry about all the different moving parts. Nobody's going to listen to me griping about like why you don't have certain things. And I fully understand that. So getting in front of that with a good production accountant is, to me, is the most important thing in the whole production experience. If it's front loaded and planned well, the end of it is going to work out in your favor.
And yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that, especially for first time filmmakers, hire an experienced line producer.
Yes.
I mean, they're worth their weight, because they can combine locations. They can find ways, looking at your script, that save you so much money and headache on the long run. I mean, yeah, you can find a brilliant director who has this vision that can go out and maybe guerrilla style, El Mariachi shooting for $7,000. Robert Rodriguez did it, but that's few and far between. I mean, and you get lucky maybe, and then you might not get lucky either. And we, unfortunately, South Carolina, well, not South Carolina, but one of our crew members was killed on a set in Georgia, where you may have heard of her, Sarah Jones, where they were trying to just skirt, the normal way of doing film, and let's just get the shot and put the crew at risk. So, first time filmmakers sometimes try to get the shot at whatever cost, and that's not a smart way to do it. Get a line producer who knows what they're doing. And for heaven's sake, please get a good sound person. I've seen so many films that, it may look good, decent enough to watch, but then you're listening to the dialogue and it's like, oh my gosh, people, why don't you get a good sound person at least? You can't understand the dialogue, or it's very echoey, or it just sounds like crap, and it's just, it brings the whole production value down. So line producer, sound guy, sound person, I should be PC here. And just, like Matt said, plan it. I think, what made someone like Spielberg and Lucas so successful is they were so meticulous about planning their productions that by the time they got on the set, they were just, they were rocking and rolling. They knew exactly where they were going, how many to get the shots. Clint Eastwood's the same way. He uses the same people. He's done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's going golfing because he can. He knows what he's doing. No fluff. Just get your shot done. Move on. And if you're working within the studio system, the studios love that. If you're working in the indie world, obviously your investors, would rather make sure you get something in the can that they can then put out to market as a completed product than to satisfy some visionary's ego, I guess, in didn't get in the shot. But I may be rambling here, but there's so many dynamics that go into making a film that I've seen play out on the set as a film commissioner, just looking at things happen where you're like, why are they doing, they could have done this so much easier if they had planned, something ahead of time. So especially the younger people, the people that are coming up, it takes a lot of planning to get all this done, but it pays off in the long run.
Yeah. No, that's all good to know. I'd be curious, Matt, because I know you mentioned how you guys are trying to get more people that have that accounting knowledge. Are there places you'd recommend that have resources if people are interested in learning more about that?
If there are, I don't know it. We didn't teach that at film school.
Okay.
If you take a normal accounting class, you're not learning how to do production accounting. Because how I've had it explained to me is it's not accounting. It's really bookkeeping.
Right.
Okay.
You're not having to you're not having to formulate things. You're really taking numbers and plugging them in, and the computer's doing the work for you. And you're figuring out what your costs are going to be tomorrow, and what are your costs going to be a week from now, and how far above budget are you, and what are your hot costs today. You're worried more about plugging in numbers than actually manipulating things. So finding that out, we had a really good, again, we had our main production accountant. He came and did a seminar for us, had a bunch of folks that were interested, but there's really no schooling for it. It's simply getting in as a clerk. I think that if you got into a clerkship type situation after having been through an accounting school, I feel like you would be well above where a lot of production accounting teams are, in that both worlds, but you're not too jaded to be able to turn your head and figure out how to make it work in film. I think that a lot of people get dead set on doing things a certain way, and if you're not of that mindset, if you're young and you haven't ever experienced it before and film sounds cool, and you are an accountant or you're in school to be an accountant, I think that checking out a clerkship on a project would be a great thing. And I say that as someone who knows how difficult it has been nationwide to find accountants. Ever since COVID, the accounting teams that we've dealt with have by and large been very disparate. So there's a guy there's somebody in Idaho, and then California, and they're working on a show here in South Carolina where they have somebody random here running the numbers from an office here, but they're all over the place. So really, you can work from wherever you want. Once you get to a certain point, obviously,
yeah,
you are. It's a situation where you're so needed that you'll be brought in onto a show. It's a very, I don't know why, because you would think that there'd be a lot of people into that, but I don't know. It's like this little niche corner of the film world is accounting, and it's really, like I said, nationwide. I would assume globally it's probably very difficult to find and fill these positions, and so there's teams that are running on much less than what they're used to. I know that we got gearing up on a HBO show that's going to shoot here, and they come in May, and that was one of the first calls that we got was they needed accountants, and did I know anybody, and I said, thankfully, because of that workshop that we did, I said, yep, I got a great person. I was able to send her number over, and hopefully we'll have 2 production accountants in the state.
Nice.
The entire state of South Carolina will have 2. Yes.
But it point what Matt just brought out, it points to as I mentioned earlier, the dynamics of the business shifting. This kind of brings us full circle. We started out as location driven. Now the whole industry is so dependent on incentives that we as a film commission have to make sure that they have in place, as a studio or as an independent, whatever it is, the personnel to be able to handle the incentive component. So that's the accounting office. And if you don't put enough emphasis on your accountants, your incentives are not going to be what you're not going to get the best bang for your incentives. So yeah, and it is very interesting that I would think more studios would probably make it a point to start training accountants, workshops or anything that they offer. I know Entertainment Partners, they're a payroll company. They do some seminars online where, because it's their software that they're trying to really sell and make sure you understand how their software works, but that's what the accountants use. So, it's kind of both and, when you're dealing with payroll companies, because the accountants have to use their payroll software and understand how the incentives for each individual state works. Not just, I'm working for this production, I don't care how you guys work in this state, I answer to the producer. Well, yes, to an extent, they hired you and you answer to them. But as Matt said, we're the executive producer now. You have to answer to us as well. And it's different in every state. So these accountants need to understand that coming in and put enough people on your staff to be able to handle it.
Definitely. That's all good to know. So yeah, I guess my final question here to wrap things up is just if people are interested in bringing their next project to South Carolina, where can they go to find you guys, get in touch with you, and see what might work out?
filmsc.com. Very simple. It gets redirected back to our page with South Carolina Parks, Rec, and Tourism, but there's links on there to both Dan and I. There's a link to our production directory, which has a crew listing, which has location listings. We've got about 11,000 different locations. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, that Dan manages and tries to keep up to date as best he can. That's really the best place to go check stuff out. If there's any announcements, we try to put it on there. Like any announcements statewide about any crew calls or different opportunities that we have that are brought to us, we can put those on our website as well. So that's really the best place, that in our Facebook page.
And our sister site is Indie Grants.
Okay.
Indie Grants is a program that we've put together to help first-time filmmakers or people that are trying to break in whatever level make a short, and we'll fund it up to $35,000 to make a short film in South Carolina, of course, using film students from Trident Technical School. So
Okay.
look up Indie Grants, and that will give you some insight as well on the whole picture of what we offer here in South Carolina.
Yeah, no, that's really cool that you guys offer that. Well, thank you again, Matt and Dan, for taking the time to come on today. This
No
was
worries.
really good. And yeah, hopefully one of these days I'll be giving you a ring to bring a
Absolutely.
project down there.
There we go.
Very good. We'll
Love
be
to work with
around.
you.
You got our number.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Make sure to like and follow this podcast and share it with others. Also, stay tuned for the release of the new book, The Producer's Life, A Guide to Practical Film Producing, releasing next week from show host Micah Versman. Until next time, thanks for listening.